Welcome, everyone, back to the men's show here at Awaken Catholic. Today, we're going to be talking about some risque business, as in, can you dress risque and still love Jesus at Mass? But that's coming up right after this. Before we get started, John Mark, if you want to kick us off here.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I want to tell you about the Awaken Nation. If you go to awakencatholic.org/donate, you can really help us out getting this ministry going by giving a one-time or recurring donation. We really appreciate it. You know, we're all about bringing people truth through beauty, and if you want to be a part of that, join the Awaken Nation. Another great way to support, though, is also by going to hallow.app/awaken. The Hallow app is a really cool app, Christian meditation. It's really well implemented, a beautiful app, really helpful for your morning cup of coffee. Download it and get the free 30-day subscription to support our ministry. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, here we are, gentlemen, again, to discuss things that matter and hopefully be somewhat illuminative through that process, maybe edify each other's journeys.
Illuminative? Is that a word?
Illuminative.
I learn new things all the time.
Bring the jar. Where's the jar for pretentious words?
Oh, that's right.
I'm not going to put money in
the
whiskey
drink.
Okay.
Or the whiskey drink, the whiskey game. Anyways, so just a really quick thing. I'm Nick Della Torre.
John Mark Grodi.
Rob Holler.
Hi, Jeff Walker.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being with me here today. We are going to be, some of this is subjective on some level, and I guess whether it is or not is part of the question we're going to be discussing. My argument is the following. Okay?
I'm ready.
Are you guys ready?
Ready.
Okay. Are you ready? My argument is the following. I think you can authentically revere and worship God no matter what you're wearing. That's my opinion. In Mass, even. I think that there's more to it.
Okay. I was going to say, that's hard to disagree with, right? The way
but
you
there's
say
more to it.
There is more to it.
It doesn't mean you should wear whatever you want at Mass.
And why? What should you base your deliberation on?
You got to cover up your parts.
Minimum.
Let's start there. The base
Which
level.
parts? Which parts do you got to cover? Because my elbow, that's a part.
The parts. The parts.
So listen, it depends on what your motive is about talking about this.
Yeah.
So this can get quickly like judgmental and lead to sort of condemnation and a focus on making subjective things into objective rules.
Yeah, sure.
But first of all, the church tells me exactly what I have to wear at every Mass. So maybe I'm not the person to comment on this. However, I think it's all about sacramentality, right? So it's sort of like saying, I believe that you can worship God in any place in the world. That's absolutely true.
Yes.
You can worship God, you can pray, you can grow in holiness anywhere, anytime. You can celebrate Mass anywhere, anytime, on the hood of a Jeep, in a hotel conference room, on the top of a mountain, or in a church. But that's not just the same thing as saying that the place doesn't matter.
Right.
And so, yeah, you can worship God wearing anything, but that's also not to say that what you're wearing doesn't matter.
And in the decision-making process, again, for me, I'm a guy with a hammer and the whole world looks like a bunch of nails or window panes, I suppose. The virtues, the cardinal virtues, I think give us a good decision-making process in this. And the first, again, prudence comes first in the sense of we want to turn to the realities of things. We don't want to start from a place of my passion or my way or your way or any. We don't want to start there. You start from the place of no. We want to turn to the reality first. And you brought up so first of the things we want to look at, well, what is the purpose of Mass? What's the purpose of clothes? All those kinds of things. We want to turn to those realities as the first step. And the next step after prudence is justice, in the sense of that we want that we're there to worship. We're there for a purpose. And so what we're wearing should fit with that purpose. Again, I'm not there. My decision making about my clothing isn't about my vanity or isn't about my coolness or isn't about, no, it's about does this go along with the purposes for being there, the sacramentality of it? And again, if we're saying mass on a mountain because we're taking a hike and that's where we happen to be, well then, we're going to probably wear the clothes that we're hiking in. But if I'm going to a normal Sunday mass, well then there's room there to say, well, I'm going to wear clothes in a way that heightens that fits more with this duty that I'm trying to perform.
And that to me is where the question is what defines clothes that fits that duty? Because that to me is where it becomes a little bit subjective to the culture, right? Like culturally, geographically, where you're at makes a huge determination about or makes a huge impact on what is acceptable, Sunday attire. Right. If we're celebrating mass in the middle of Africa, and it's not because we're hiking on a mountain, but that is just where they live and that is where they celebrate mass, they're going to look totally different than what we might look like in Northwest Ohio. Certainly. So how do we then delineate this is objectively better to wear this or this style or this in this way or whatever, when it is such a subjective thing based on the culture and the geography? What becomes the guiding principle for that?
Well, the objective thing is that we have to do this duty, that we should show respect and show honor, and show modesty and decency and stuff like that.
Yeah. But how do we...
But the instantiation of that does look completely different by time or place or culture.
Yeah.
Like how does my culture... Because I could look at the way my culture does it, wherever I happen to be. They tend to wear these sorts of things. They don't wear these sorts of things. If I'm intentionally running contrary to that just to be a contrarian, well, I'm doing something dumb or wrong, But we have to look at, well, how does my culture do this? And there's something to kind of obeying what the community does. How do we show respect as a community?
Yeah, and that is, I think, both I like that, and I also am torn about that, because I find we as Catholics in general are challenged in our faith to be a people set apart. And in a lot of ways, that means not looking like your community. But then we're also kind of in this question being asked to look like our community. And so I wonder, because we are people set apart, I mean, we should not be this is a different question, but we shouldn't be pro-choice. We shouldn't be participating in a lot of the things that our society says, this is what's normal, this is what's acceptable, premarital sex, a lot of different things. And so what are we basing, where is the line between here's what our society says, and I just want to know what we're basing, what makes a suit and tie or a shirt and tie, or even just a button down shirt for a guy, what makes that better Sunday attire, other than the fact that someone arbitrarily decided this is what looks nicer?
That's it. I mean, yeah, it's convention. Would you say, this just came to me, I haven't had time to process through it, but clothing is like a language.
Ooh, yes.
Sure. It's expressions.
Yes.
And we use common words. We have to use the same language if we're going to talk, if we're going to have shared meaning.
So I went to visit my brother in Central America. He was doing his coffee business thing, my brother. And there, it was not culturally appropriate to wear shorts. We did not know that. I think I wore pants. I don't remember. My brother wore shorts. I think after the fact, he had not been there very long, I don't think, at that point. But we knew that then. Our intention in going to Mass was not, I don't think anyone could fault our intentions. Oh, it's hot down there. It's so hot. It was super hot. But there, the language that was read by other people was probably, well, these guys aren't bringing their best to Mass. They're not being reverent in some way. So that language does not always translate well, but that doesn't bring with it condemnation necessarily.
So if the question is, where do we start from? I don't think we necessarily start from cultural norms, like this is what is dressy and this is what is not dressy. I think you start with what we're doing, like John Mark was saying before, what is our purpose here? And so you have to understand sort of how liturgy works. That liturgy is an all-encompassing human experience. And so for Christians, and especially for Catholics, the idea when we go to church is that we're not simply expressing ourselves. Liturgy is not expressive prayer. There's other times when we do have expressive prayer, when we take what's going on inside and we, through our language, either with speech or clothes or body position, express what's going on in the inside, bring that out. But liturgy is really impressive. It's supposed to make an impression upon us.
Interesting.
That's good.
And that's why all of the stuff of liturgy is important. And why, all things being considered, all things being equal, we have Mass not on the hood of a Jeep regularly, but in a church, because the environment matters. And that's why we don't have silence and no music at Mass regularly. That happens from time to time, but that's not sort of like the ideal liturgy, because the music helps us to enter in. It makes an impression upon us. And that's why we sit and stand and kneel at different times, because that makes an impression upon us about what's going on. So I think you start with understanding that even the clothes that we wear are sacramentals, in the sense like that sacramentals are things that are supposed to lead us to the sacraments, that are supposed to dispose us to receiving grace.
Yeah.
And so how do all of these things, including what I'm wearing, dispose me to receiving the grace that's being offered to me at Mass? So I think you got to start with that whole concept, which is still foreign to a lot of Catholics.
Wasn't historically what Catholics would wear to Mass the baptismal gown, or representing that? Is that
right? So there is some, now to be honest with you, I don't know if that was ever the case that they wore that constantly to Mass, but that is sort of the idea between why all of the ministers at Mass wear an alb. That's the baptismal garment. And then after the Easter Vigil, when people are received into the church for a time, at least historically, they would wear that baptismal garment to church, because it was supposed to remind you of who you are and what you were about. So I don't know that was ever like all throughout the church year, everyone always did it. But
we use holy water.
There.
Holy water kind of calls us back to that. And there's there's sort of a reminding of our baptism, even if we're not wearing the clothes. It's sort of putting that back on, that state.
Something that comes to mind for me is Archbishop Leonard Blair, and when he was in our diocese as Bishop Leonard Blair, he fielded a question once on the Bishop's Corner radio show about liturgical dancing. And I thought this was a super, I was, the moment that question was asked, I was like, oh my gosh, what is he going to say? And his answer, I've never heard a better response to it. But I think it directly applies to this question of clothing. And I think it applies to a lot of questions of piety and like how liturgy is approached. But his response was something to the effect of, if dance as a part of the liturgy is something that distracts from the sacrament, something that distracts from the prayer, it's out of place. And that is largely, if not exclusively, based on the culture of the community. Whereas dancing as a form of worship, in an authentic expression of worship, is maybe very organically present as a part of other communities, like literally in Africa or whatever. Like if you attend Mass in Africa, it's going to look very, even a Cuban Mass, like my family growing up in, visiting my family in South Florida, a Cuban Mass, like it's rowdy, and these people are very authentically through that rowdiness expressing worship, but it could come off as irreverent to someone that culturally is not familiar with that, right? Or accustomed to that. And so I think that the other part of this is that the reality of the different cultures and like something that to us is authentic worship and authentic reverence in Africa would be like, is that person even alive in the Holy Spirit? Like, what's wrong with this person? Why aren't they dancing? And we might just be like not used to it, right?
Yeah.
But then do you want to say something?
I say, that reminds me of the Simpsons episode with Catholic Heaven.
I don't think I've seen that.
Oh, yeah.
Link in the description.
Play
That
it.
is such a good
Rolling.
We'll take a pause.
But the other thing that makes me think about is like in the years that I've worked at different parishes in the past, I remember seeing in the congregation multiple times over the years people that were very clearly from other cultures, because they would wear attire according to those other cultures.
Sure.
And so for them, that was a really proper, authentic way to express through the language of the clothing, their presence to the sacrament, their presence to the worship and the liturgy. But to me, the challenge is, and so that's important because it stood out. It wasn't the same as what we understand. So it sticks out like a sore thumb, right?
Right.
But it's still an their version of authentic expression through that. So where do we draw the line, and who do we think we are to say that is authentic because it's culturally recognized or whatever, but then maybe someone else that isn't from necessarily another country, but still in whatever, for whatever reason, authentically maybe expresses themselves differently. How do we look at that and say that's not acceptable?
Well, yeah.
I think it's a hard thing to define even culturally, but being part of the Western world and Western culture, there are certain pieces of clothing that just speak a certain level of importance or carry along with them a certain gravitas. So again, I don't vary my wardrobe very often, but at my last parish, I was assigned to a K through 12 school, and it was shortly after I arrived there, and it was my first time walking into the school wearing a cassock. So I wear my collar all the time. I don't usually wear a cassock daily. I sort of treat that as sort of the dress up kind of clergy garb. But I had just been at an important liturgy right before, and I was walking some students back to the school, and I walked in and there was a whole line of second graders that were walking through the hallway right in front of the entrance door. So I walked in and I sort of stepped back to let them walk by. It was the first time they had seen me wearing a cassock. They'd seen me dressed like a priest every day. But one of the second graders looked at me and said, "Wow." And then spontaneously bowed. So it's this big, profound bow, and then kept walking. And then all of the second graders sort of followed suit afterwards. And they're like, "Wow." And they would bow.
That's so great.
So after a while, it became a monkey see, monkey do kind of thing. But that kid's initial reaction was something like, "Wow, something important is happening here."
Yeah.
So without any training, without any prompting, it's not like we had talked about different kinds of clerical garb and what they mean and their history or anything. There was just something about that said to that kid something. He's doing something important.
Well, this gets into another topic that's connected to all this that I care a lot about, and it's why I appreciate wrestling through this topic a little bit and trying to get some understanding of it, because we recognize that even if we just limit it to clothes, but if we broaden it to just physical piety in general, genuflection, the hand motion, the things we do in Mass, whether or not we do those, we recognize that there's a lot of baggage that goes along with those, why people do or don't.
I think we're going to do a whole episode just on that.
Well, we're going to, dig into some of that baggage, but there's this issue of the example we set. We're fathers or spiritual fathers here. When we're wrestling with these things, the decisions we make then impact the little eyes that are watching us. And so we have to decide what we're going to do. Going back to this, so another angle of this is that when you were talking, Nick, is just recognizing that there's a few different levels. There's the theoretical level of what the Mass is about, what clothing is for, all that kind of stuff. And then there's two levels of, there's what this means in terms of my discernment about my actions. Is a whole separate discussion about how I regard other people.
Right.
That's two different things. Like, I have a duty to do my duty, to be reverent, to be modest, to do justice, to worship well. That's completely separate from whether or not someone else is doing that duty, because I don't know what's going on in their heart.
Yeah.
So that's a different subject. It's a different thing.
So I think a lot of people have learned exactly that recently, as many schools have gone to remote learning, and especially Catholic schools or public schools that have uniforms.
Sure.
So everyone loves the whole working from home, remote learning thing, because, you can put on a shirt and then wear your pajamas on, right? That's the sort of meme that's going around. And
I have not done that.
Never. I wouldn't.
For any Zoom meetings or anything.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, me neither. Where's that episode on sarcasm?
Coming soon.
However, more schools have been sort of saying, it's important for your child, if we're going to do this remote learning thing, that they wear their uniform even when they're home.
Interesting.
So, and I think it speaks to that twofold thing, because when you look at why kids wear uniforms in schools, you could do a whole conversation about that.
Yeah.
But it has that two levels of things. One, it's the witness it's how it affects other people.
Yeah.
So, right, the uniform is sort of the great equalizer, that we're not focused or distracted because someone is wearing super expensive name brand stuff, or because this person is not wearing anything name brand, right? So it's other people, but it also just has an effect on the student themselves, and it helps them to enter into the learning experience. So I think that's why, more than, that the great equalizer thing, why you're wearing the uniform while you're at home.
Yeah.
Because this is what I wear to learn.
Right.
It brings up the idea of around putting on your formal clothes. We put on this exterior thing, clothes to represent our interior self. So everyone gets dressed up for a really nice fancy dinner. You act a little differently.
Right.
You're acting in your true form. It gets into some you could probably go into it better than I could, but philosophically, you're reflecting your interior dignity exteriorly.
Well, you're also, it goes both ways too, because you dress for the job you want, not the job you have, that whole kind of notion. You're communicating to other people what we're doing here through your clothing, but you're also communicating to yourself. Like when you want to start out the day well, you get up and you, around our house, we call our robes the sloth cloth. Because if you keep the robe on, then it's like the morning extends well into the afternoon.
I remember telling my parents when I was younger that at noon, they're no longer pajamas, it's lounge wear. So don't worry about it.
That's so great.
That's good. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
But it does reflect that interior disposition. And so when you're going to Mass, what we wear does affect what disposition we're entering into the liturgy with.
Yeah.
And there was another parishioner, I'm just telling stories today, but that's what you got.
Yeah, that's good.
Another parishioner at a former parish of mine that came to daily Mass, and he wore suit and tie.
Nice.
Daily Mass, 7 a.m. I mean, yeah. So I figured, well, he's got to wear the suit and tie for work. There are a lot of business people that come to that Mass. And then I found out he works from home, and that in fact, he doesn't zoom into meetings. It's totally a phone-based business. And as soon as he gets home, white shirt, shorts. So I'm like, wow, this guy puts on a suit and tie.
Wow.
For 7 a.m. daily Mass every day. And I asked him about it. I said, I'm for it, but he said, it doesn't matter whether it's Christmas or Sunday or Tuesday. What I'm going to is the most important thing that's happening on earth.
Wow.
And so I dress like I'm going to the most important thing that's happening on earth.
That is beautiful.
Yeah.
That says something.
Right.
So yeah, I don't think you're any less holy or anything if you're not doing that, because I don't think if I were not a priest that I would necessarily wear a suit and tie every day. I feel guilty now that I've sort of explained that, and now I'm saying that, right? Because it feels like I should. But there really is something about the witness to others and what it does for ourselves and how it opens us up to grace.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the challenge is navigating, seeking out the authentic virtue in it, rather than a sense of avoiding the guilt of not doing it, or the embarrassment or whatever. Because I think, for me, if I'm ever dressed down a little bit when I go to Mass, I'm thinking people around me might be judging me or whatever. And I know my version of Jesus well enough to know that he doesn't care. But it's more about my disposition. I think that's a lot of what we're getting at here is how are we entering into the worship through our attire? Because Jesus doesn't care, but we should care because he is so special, because he is God.
Yeah. And again, this is the reason that prudence is the mother of the cardinal virtues here, because when we carry out justice, prudence also recognizes the different situations that we're in. And we know, if we're honest with ourselves, we know in our hearts why we're doing what we're doing. Okay? I know that there are Sundays that I have gone to Mass dressed down, not because I had to, not because I didn't have time, not because I was rushing with the kids, but just because it takes a little extra work. And I ought to have, because there was no reason not to, other than I was feeling lazy. That was the reason, the laziness. That might not be your reason. You may have had a good reason. My reason was laziness, not a good reason. Other times, we would go to this Dominican parish in Zanesville, Ohio. It was a Dominican parish. It's not a Dominican parish now. And we loved the priests there. They were super, cut and sharp with the liturgy, like the hand motions, the whole thing, really great liturgy. They would do their midday mass was this like 15 or 20 minute mass. And it was quick. It was solid and it was tight, but it was quick. And Teresa asked them about it once, and they explained, this is the working person's mass. And you'd notice out in the pews, people in their painting clothes or their construction clothes or their, whatever, or the blue collar or the white collar. They were there in their work clothes, and they would do this mass so these people could participate quickly over their lunch hour.
That's awesome.
Now, were they there in their non-Sunday clothes out of laziness, like I might have been? No, they were there because that's the way they're able to do that in their day.
Yeah.
So they're doing justice, giving God his due, but prudently recognizing the situation. This is what I can give. This is what makes sense for my situation. And they had to discern that for themselves.
Absolutely. 100% agree with that. Because there are times when that is the most appropriate thing to wear. Just sort of there are times when mass on top of the mountain is the most appropriate place to have mass. Right. Rather than not have mass. Or mass on top of a Jeep is the most beautiful mass that you've been to in a long time. Right. Mm-hmm. So there's sort of this whole like all things being equal and also like where I'm at right now and what's going on.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And so the tension is like considering that working mass, for example, if you're an outsider looking in and you don't necessarily know what's behind that, like, why do we care?
Right. Because that's what Catholics get that all the time.
Yeah.
And you sort of see it in marketing from non-Catholic churches. Like, we don't care what you wear here. Come as you are. No need to dress up. No nothing. I sort of take that in a disparaging way against Catholics sometimes. Like those Catholics are all hung up on externals and making everything look good. So that is something.
Like we're welcoming unlike the Catholics.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And I think about even the example that you shared, Rob, about the Central American Mass you attended. And I think like, it is a beautiful thing for a community to want to, as a community, worship well. But to me, the challenge is the conflict that I find in my heart when I reflect on an example like that is at the cost, though, of making someone feel unwelcomed. You are a well-formed person.
Sure.
Right? But let's say you're not. Let's say someone is in that exact situation, happens to be passing through the area, and they're not well-formed, and they have that encounter, they have that moment.
Let's compare this time with history. I mean, we're in a time where there are so many people who, going to Mass, worshiping, living a life where, Christianity is normal and encompassed. That's not where we are. It's very culturally diverse. A lot of people are unfamiliar. A lot of people are seeking. And
it's post-Christian.
Historically, a lot of these other places, our liturgy is built up around a community of faith that is very different than the one that we have now. And we have to be somehow both attentive to that and yet not abandon, what is, what it means to be truly Christian.
Yeah.
It's that tension between come as you are, but also we're not going to just stay where you are.
Yeah.
That once someone really is sort of living in the environment of a Catholic way of life, that things like liturgy and prayer and things demand more of us then in order for us to go deeper into that experience. And that becomes problematic when we expect people who are, in the shallow end of the pool to be able to scuba dive. If we're just learning to swim, it's a whole different ball game.
Well, and the premise though of here's the tension. Like what you said is right on the money about like come as you are, but we're not going to leave you where you are. The tension is implying that you have to look like this to be where we're at. And that's a tough thing.
I think there's a very natural, like when we were at that Mass, we walk in, like we're the only white people there and we look different and we're not wearing clothes. We're not dressed as nicely as the other people. I mean, we feel out of place. But that I don't know that necessarily, because we're there, shouldn't change anything about that culture. But it is hard.
So how do we approach that though, as people who are who are where we are. We're sitting around talking about Catholic things because we're living a Catholic way of life, right? So like we're in, we're buying in, we're drinking the Kool-Aid. It's delicious.
So
but
good.
like what you said, so you acknowledged that what I said was true. I'm going to acknowledge what you said was true, but that didn't even like cross my mind.
Of course, right.
Which perhaps it should. So how on earth do we address dress? Well, there's like, how do we, as people who are sort of already in,
I think we just found the title for the video. How do we address dress?
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Well, again, like you said way back at the beginning, Father, we have to start by turning to the reality of what it's worship, and we're there to do justice. So again, this begins with us just trying to do well by our particular duty. Before we can't start with how someone else is going to take this and try to work our way back from that, because everyone's going to take it differently. We can't control what's in another person's head or heart. So we have to start with, how does my culture do this? What's the generally speaking, what's the way that I ought to dress as far as I am able to fit this Mass? And then we have to do our best to make sure that my heart is pure because of that. Because you can also even do those right things, but for the wrong reasons. And you can dress nicely so that, people see how nicely I'm dressed, whatever. Now, if you notice that in yourself, you still need to do the justice of dressing appropriately for Mass, but then you got to work on your heart.
Yeah.
You have to moderate that desire.
Make sure you're not peacocking.
And then you also have to recognize that too, if there's a part of you that is looking down on someone else, I mean, that's just stupid. Like, again, if language is, if clothing is language, like it's just as dumb as looking down on somebody else's language. Like, to look down on somebody else because they're using different words than I do, or they don't know the words that our special club uses. To look down on them, and that is stupid. It's, I'm going to dress in a certain way because this is my duty. But why would I have looked down on somebody else? I don't know what's in their heart. I don't know what their reasons are. And so I should be just as welcoming. In fact, maybe I'm over the top. I'm a bit more welcoming to that person because I recognize they may be out of their element. This may be a new, different place for them.
Yeah, and that's all. It's all prudence. That's all. And the thing about prudence too is
Semper prudentiae.
You cannot decide what prudence is for someone else. Prudence is only given to you as a virtue.
And this is why I said at the beginning, this is a little subjective.
Yes. So like God gives you the grace to decide in your particular situation.
I was on the edge of my seat waiting to see if John Mark would determine.
It checks out.
Sorry, Rob.
Okay. That's okay. Moving on.
No. Go. Sorry.
Well, I mean, it's just that God gives you the particular grace in the particular situation to make the decision you need to make.
Yeah.
Prudence is yours to choose.
Yeah.
So I can't go and say, Nick, what you're doing is imprudent, because I want to do it all the time. I'm telling you.
Of course.
He gives
my
me
daily text message from Rod. Nick, you're screwing this up.
Yes. But it's not my place.
Right.
It's not my place. But it doesn't mean, there's also this other dynamic of like, the more you're able to love someone, to be close to someone, be friends with someone, you can bridge that gap. In relationship, I can say, hey, Nick, there's always a difference. No one can know for certain what prudence is for another person. But in relationship, I feel like I'm able to bridge the gap and say, well, hey, maybe this isn't prudent. Maybe you should consider this. But outside of relationship, looking at someone I don't know, nearly impossible.
I think we also have to prioritize, like there has to be a moral hierarchy in terms of like what are the fundamentals? Like, let's say someone's coming into the fold and they're just trying to navigate, what is this Christian life about? They're checking out Mass. They aren't dressing in their Sunday best, so to speak.
That'd be a dumb place to start.
Right. So we have to, the first step is we got to journey with them and we have to like love on them. The challenge that we
have to realize that the goal is not to be the church of the well-dressed.
Yes.
No.
Yeah,
to be the church of the people who are giving God worship. And again, we've already admitted that the externals, those change in time and place, whatever. The key is that it starts in their heart, and then they work out how best to instantiate that.
How to manifest that. In their attire. Because the reality is, like, we have to be so careful when we're talking about these things, and we're saying like there is a better way to do this, which is to use your attire as a language that expresses your worship. But we cannot make that on anywhere near the level of of figuring out your sin and like working on that and like bringing that to the Lord and his mercy and bringing it to confession, bringing it to baptism, depending on, where you're at. Like we that has to be so low on the totem pole as far as priorities, because that's just going to turn someone off. And also it actually doesn't matter as much as this other stuff. Yeah. So we have to be willing to, create that address. We have to be able to acknowledge that hierarchy. I think that's huge too.
Going back to the uniforms, it's interesting. If we think of language if dress as language, clothing as language, again, what are we communicating when we kind of wear something similar? Well, again, what we're not expressing is something about ourselves. It's about what we're doing, where we're at. And so, because you go in different directions too. I mean, we've just kind of talked about like dressing nicely, but obviously I could go to church in my tuxedo. And then what am I expressing? Like, why would I, what am I expressing in that point? I'm expressing that I'm different, I'm better. Part of, again, we do try to conform to, so to speak, because what we're addressing is we're doing this together. We as a community are communicating something.
In Christ, there is no Jew or Greek, no slave or free, no woman or man, no rich or poor, no well-dressed, underdressed.
Tommy Hilfiger, American Needs.
It's kind of true in marriage as well. Before I came here, my wife made me change my shirt. And then she sprayed me with this wrinkle releaser because I didn't look good enough.
She is so good to you.
Good. Well done, Katie.
Yeah.
Props to
and
Katie.
On that note, my goodness, gentlemen, this has been an edifying conversation.
Hold on. There's one thing we have not mentioned this whole episode. Out of charity, I think it's in line with what we've talked about. Nick is not wearing pants right now.
Oh my gosh.
It's true.
Oh, two main. I think you can.
You can kind of see it.
Oh man.
Right.
Why does that matter?
Because
I don't know, but I'm really
trying to puzzle
glad
out what you're trying to
the
communicate to us.
hierarchy, Rob, the hierarchy.
All right.
What are you trying to communicate?
Oh my gosh.
Just because it's his studio, framed from here up.
I'm wearing the chair, or I'm in the chair with the big arms.
The camera angles here.
Yeah.
So
That's amazing.
I wasn't going to.
Now we're done. Now
we're done. John Mark, do you want to lead us home with the Awaken Nation?
I got this.
Oh,
Rob's doing Awaken Nation.
Okay, so Awaken Nation.
You're doing great.
Nation.
Continue.
Subscribe, retweet.
No.
No.
Subscribe.
Nope.
Okay.
Resubscribe. Unsubscribe. Resubscribe.
No.
Unmitigated disaster.
Donate.
I think you need to lean into
John
the
Mark,
frame for him.
John Mark.
Okay, so Awaken Nation is a group of people just like you who make this possible. If you like this show, the men's show, if you like any of the other awesome shows, oh my gosh, there's so many awesome shows right now. Please join the Awaken Nation. We're all about bringing people the truth through beauty, and if you want to be part of that, you can make a one-time or recurring donation by going to awakencattholic.org/donate.
Ooh, Colleen's coming in clutch with the camera angle.
Another cool way that you can support Awaken Catholic is by downloading the Hallow app. What is the Hallow app? We'll go to hallow.app/awaken to download. It is a great app for Christian meditation. I just discovered today, I was using it this morning, and there's a little music button that while you're doing this guided meditation, you can pick Gregorian chant or the sound of waves in the background. It was pretty awesome. It's super helpful, super convenient, really well implemented, and a beautiful app. That's one thing we're about here. So download that at hallow.app/awaken.
And the key is honestly, like the way in which you can help our ministry through this app is by doing the 1 month free premium membership, because that is the part that helps us.
It's worth it. It's good.
It's super good.
Well, hey, he did much better than I did.
It was a team effort.
You were right. You were right. I'm sorry.
And before we started, I was like, Rob, are you sure you got this?
He was not sure.
Oh my gosh.
Didn't come prepared.
All right, gentlemen, this has been so great.
At least he's wearing pants.
That's true.
We'll see you. Oh my
That
gosh.
makes three of us.
I feel very judged. The hierarchy, gentlemen. The hierarchy. We will see you next week here on The Men's Show.
This show and all media on Awaken Catholic is made possible by the Awaken Nation and the Hallow app. The Awaken Nation is a community of people like you who support all things Awaken for as cheap as a cup of coffee a week and get access to exclusive content. Learn more by visiting awakencatholic.org/donate. Hallow is the only audio-guided Catholic prayer app focused on contemplative prayer and traditional Catholic meditation such as Lectio Divina, Daily Examen, and the Rosary. We here at Awaken all use Hallow every day and love it. To learn more or give it a try, visit hallow.app/awaken.